Hello, everybody. Thank you for everybody on Zoom that has been very, very patient with a very delayed start to this session today. We were trying to get some new technology in our building to help us with this. And as these things go, it wasn't really working out and we had to kind of pivot. So I know we've all been in that situation before. I hope everybody was able to use the time productively while they waited for us to get going. Now we'll officially get started. So my name is Mary Beth Collins. I'm not going to be visible on the screen today, but you'll just hear my voice. I'll be sharing the slides that I would like to use for our discussion today. And that will be kind of the visual. At the end, we might be able to break out into more of a gallery view to have a discussion, but I'd like to rely on these visual aids for today's discussion about AI and democracy as of fall 2024. And for fun, we threw in how it relates to Taylor Swift. So let's advance to the next slide. I am the executive director of the Center for Community and Nonprofit Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. If you're here with us today, then you probably know something about our center or are getting our emails. We're really glad you're here. We are getting into a routine this academic year. We actually started it last spring, where for the most part, every third Thursday of the month, we're going to be hosting one of our CommUniversity sessions. At the end of today's session, we'll tell you about our next one coming up in October. This one today, we chose this theme. I'll explain a little bit why in a little while, but I think everybody's mind is on the election, so this shouldn't be any surprise why we're talking about AI and democracy in fall of 2024. Our center, though, if you're not familiar with it, is a center here at the School of Human Ecology on the UW-Madison campus. That is a university-based center for community-engaged teaching, research, and outreach, focused on advancing the work of the civic and nonprofit sectors. You can advance the slide. This is a kind of complicated image that's a little bit outdated, but I basically just kept it in the presentation to show you that we're at the School of Human Ecology and we support various other academic programs, including degree programs and our Civil Society and Community Studies department. So if you're interested in our degree bearing programs or any of that work, just reach out to us. But the takeaway here is we do teaching, research, and outreach from the School of Human Ecology, but we serve all of campus and we work in Wisconsin and the world at large. And we do have roles with some of these degree bearing programs. Next slide. So one of the things we do at our center, which allows us to be able to share information about democracy and AI, as is the case today, but other themes related to democracy, is that our center looks at questions of third sector organizations, nonprofit organizations, but also civil society as a whole, and the ecosystem in which people come together to solve problems in community, in voluntary efforts, in institutionalized organizations of different types. And as many of you know, if you've ever studied democracy or civil society, those underpinnings relate very much to having a healthy pro-democratic context in which to, in our case, kind of advance the American democratic experiment is sometimes the way that we talk about it, something that we should never take for granted. And so one of the things that we work on at our center is we help to support the Civic Health of Wisconsin initiative. This is a broad-based, coalition-based effort of kind of started with a group of nonpartisan statewide organizations that came together to say, let's have a multifaceted approach to the broad theme of civic health in Wisconsin. If you'd like to learn more about that initiative, you can follow that QR code there to allow you to see, the various things we're working on when it comes to the Civic Health of Wisconsin initiative. Some of the things that I want to point out that are just kind of like easy to understand pieces of what that initiative has done and is working on. For one thing, I didn't actually put this in the slides, but we published the first ever Civic Health of Wisconsin report in 2020, which gives a snapshot of the different components of civic health that we know about in Wisconsin and how Wisconsin is performing in those ways, including how much Wisconsinites volunteer, how much Wisconsinites vote, What is the civic education landscape in Wisconsin? How do we prepare young people or adults for participating in democracy? How do we do with philanthropic giving? Are we polarized? Do we talk to our neighbors? Are we lonely? Are we socially connected? So those items that I just described are not comprehensive, but they give you a taste of the kinds of things we think about when it comes to civic health and what's in that first report. We also are preparing our second ever Civic Health of Wisconsin report, which will come out hopefully within a month. One of the really interesting things about the difference between the way that we prepared the report in 2020 and where we are today is that there is just so much more information and data about these themes because people are really paying attention to these underpinnings of democracy and to the way that our communities are healthy and people are staying connected. And we know that there are huge challenges with that in the last era of social media after an already recognized decline in associations and participation, which was evidenced famously by Robert Putnam in the 90s with his book Bowling Alone, which was a kind of precursor to things that even exacerbated that more, like the pandemic and the rise of different kinds of media landscapes and sadly the rise of authoritarian and the decline of democratic regimes globally. So that's the context we're in. That's civic health. Some of the other activities that we do in addition to the report, getting back to that, are that we did host a community conference. We've done it a couple times now. We did it last in spring of 2023. And there's actually, if you follow that QR code, among the other information that we share about our initiative, we also do we do have a nice report about that conference, and we had 47 organizations from across the civic health landscape present at that conference. So it's a pretty impressive example of the way that there are so many organizations doing great work around civic health in Wisconsin, and our initiative really tries to pull them together and make sure that we're network strengthening across those organizations. We also have been hosting monthly civic health meetups where anyone that wants to, that's working on nonpartisan work around civic health in Wisconsin, can come together with each other. And every month there's a different theme. And we try to kind of have an easy facilitation structure where anybody can just jump in and get connected with other civic health folks around those topics. We have worked on various grant projects with different partners around themes of civic health. And we just did the Civic Health Challenge back in August. I'm kind of working in a random order of this list here. Sorry about that. But we did host Civic Health Challenge programming in August that provided individuals that signed up for the challenge daily prompts for things that they could do to increase their own civic health. So investigating a new volunteer opportunity, getting connected with a neighbor that they didn't know yet, looking at media sources that are different than the kinds of media sources you usually pay attention to. Those are the types of things that were included in the Civic Health Challenge. And we're probably going to do that again as an annual thing in the month of August, which is Civic Health Month. So today's session on AI and democracy was one that we had hoped to feature at our community conference in April, but we ultimately pared back the sessions that we were doing just a little bit. And this was one of the ones we promised to follow up with. We still had quite a list of sessions that, we felt provided a really good overview of what was happening with civic health in Wisconsin and lots of issues. But this was one we didn't end up doing in person at the conference, and we wanted to follow up now about it. So with no further ado, we'll get into today's topic. We'll go advance. And what we're going to do today is try to give a little bit of an overview, pretty elementary, but something to kind of get your gears turning and highlight the main issues of current issues and trends related to AI and democracy that have been identified by experts and observers. So I'm not claiming as the speaker today to be an expert in this, but I have pulled in a bunch of sources, and I've actually attended some pretty high level events recently with national experts on this topic, and I've kind of pulled in some of the takeaways from those sessions. We will also give an overview of the type of civil society organizations and efforts that are trying to address concerns and provide guidance. Since we are a Center for Community and Nonprofit Studies, I think what's going on in civil society around these issues is a really important angle we want to make sure and address. And then we want to discuss together and get some of your input on our experiences with and concerns about AI and democracy, and then feel better prepared to navigate this context and think about ways we can be good actors in the context. So let's keep going. Generally, let's just kind of set the stage with what is going on with AI in general. Like, forget about democracy for a moment. Let's just talk about AI. So what is it? AI is the theory and development of computer systems able to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence, such as visual perception, speech recognition, decision-making, and translation between languages. As I think most of us living on the planet right now know, and that have access to, modern news sources and have internet, we are aware that there are a variety of platforms and applications that have really showed up in the world in recent times, and that those are expanding in number and capacity. And there's been a huge uptick. I mean, I was just thinking about how I think it was just February of 2024 when there was this famous editorial author who did like an experiment with AI on Valentine's Day, and the AI chatbot was telling him he didn't love his wife, and there was this very like shocking summary that he published about that experience. And I remember feeling like, whoa, this is something I've never seen anything like this. I know about the movie Her, but I didn't know that AI was already at the point that it could respond in those ways. And that was only in February. That was only 6 months ago. And in that 6 months, there has been a just, influx of information and familiarity with AI that has exploded in at least my world, and I'm sure that's true for many of you. So a huge uptick in the use, visibility, and awareness of AI. Generative AI is the mechanism whereby you can scan the internet for existing content and then put it together and synthesize it when it can answer questions through chatbots and things like that. We all are sort of familiar with that. I think at this point, machine learning is being able to like use the robotic mind or capacity to advance processes and design of systems. And then facial recognition has also become very common and is also facing huge questions about civil liberties and the like. So those are some of the areas that I think we've seen it really pop up. And of course, there is a huge range of like possibilities and perils that can come up for the use of AI. I think there's some excitement about like, what can this do to make efficiencies? And wow, this same sort of feelings we probably had when the internet first came out. Like, wow, there's all kinds of new things we can do much more easily and quickly. This is amazing. But I think most people that I know actually feel that that's slightly outweighed by their sense of peril about the possibilities of AI. And those themes of possibilities and perils, I think, are definitely going to come into play when we talk about AI and its intersection with democracy as well. So next slide. So where has AI showed up in the democracy space so far? This is not a comprehensive list, but this is a little sample platter of some of the places that I've seen it and that we've seen it, and that I've pulled this in from other people that are paying way more attention to it to me. I will ask you, so if you have something on your mind that you haven't seen or that you don't see on this list, I'm going to ask you in a moment to share your examples. But there are some possibilities for AI that could be really positive, like the notion of easing interaction with the public sector. So if you're a citizen and you're trying to navigate local government about an issue that you'd like to deal with, through agencies or offices, AI could be a helpful tool in navigating that. If you want to send a letter to all of your local to statewide representatives about an issue that you care about, AI could generate applicable letters or communiques for you without you having to do every single one individually to get them to all of your locally elected or state representatives or national office holding representatives. So there's some ideas there where AI could actually be nice for democracy in theory and participation. Obviously, I think many of us have seen some version of something like AI or actual AI when it comes to campaigns. Like a lot of us are getting text messages and emails all the time. And I will admit that I don't know exactly how campaigns are using AI for that, but I suspect there's some application of AI going on with like taking a list, taking a particular communication, customizing it, and sending out these blasts, right? And those can be legitimate legal uses. They might be annoying, but they're not necessarily nefarious or untrue, or coming at the communication with anything other than a very transparent objective, which is like we're trying to rally support or engagement with a candidate, right? Or with an issue. However, there are concerns, of course, and that's kind of probably where we're going to go with more of this discussion today about election and government related content and interference. So is there a possibility, and we'll get into these examples, that with this technology to create communications and images and maybe even facial recognition? Obviously, when you're creating content, I think they are using facial recognition technology to make like fake deep fakes. We're going to talk about deep fakes. Are there ways that that technology is going to be used to interfere with truth or interfere with processes or content about candidates or elections or government activities that could lead to interfering conspiracy theories or misinformation or distrust of systems? So we're going to talk about that. And who would be using that, and why would they be using that, and what is their objective, and how is that maybe causing like an anti-democratic or anti-participatory effect? We also are seeing some interesting stuff out there about the way that AI could be used to address polling. If you are a political junkie, you know that polling is this like strange space right now where everybody knows how flawed it is, and technology itself has changed the way that people are able to even be engaged with polling, because people don't pick up phone calls from numbers they don't recognize anymore, because cell phones have changed the way we use our telephones. And so polling is off, but we still use it all the time. And every day right now, you can open up a newspaper or turn on a media source and find out that there's new polling information, even though the caveats that are attached to that are like huge and sweeping. Like, we know that polling is wrong, but we're still going to tell you what the polling is saying anyway. So there's some interesting stuff out there that AI might be a resource that could help adjust that in some way. And then we know that because of all of this information landscape stuff that's popping up, like I said, even in the last 6 months, when there are legitimate queries about how Americans feel about the intersection of AI and democracy, we know that 78% of Americans believe that AI will affect the election. And that's a current statistic, and I'm sorry that I don't have a source for you posted in this slide. But I think that it leaves a lot of questions open. Like, does that mean people think that AI is actually going to affect like election results? Like AI is going to interfere with polling or like actual voting locations? Or is that people saying, oh, I know that there are like deep fakes out there, and that's going to affect the way that people perceive candidates or vote? So we don't know exactly how people think it will affect elections, but we know that people are thinking about this and concerned about this, and do think that AI is powerful enough that it could have an effect. The types of AI content that the experts, not me, would say are really showing up in this particular election in fall of 2024 is really focused on deepfakes. So the idea that you can generate content that can look like someone, sound like someone, because of these deep learning applications, and then you can create manipulated information that someone that is receiving that information can believe is really coming from a trusted source or a particular candidate or party or individual. And then they might believe that the message that's being associated with that is coming from that person, which is very different than somebody on Facebook saying, I believe that this person, we know that there has been misinformation, right? So let's step back for a minute and reflect on the way that in the 2016 and 2020 elections, there was a lot of concern about misinformation, but a lot of times that misinformation, if you think back to 2016 and like the Pizzagate example, that information, and that was a situation where there were misinformation, fake news sources that were proliferating on social media, telling stories about, specifically in the case of Pizzagate, the example that I used, Hillary Clinton, and a story that was fake, but these fake news stories were proliferating on social media. And there was a thought that like some of that misinformation might have changed people's views about the candidate. But the difference between that information was, in that case, it looked like a news source, and you had to be discerning about whether or not you believe that was a legitimate news source. And that was a challenge, and still is a challenge in our media landscape for a lot of us. But this deep fake concept goes a step further, where you actually see an image of someone or something or hear their voice, and it takes it to a different level of difficulty to decipher, I think. It's very compelling looking information, because it looks like there's a really famous video right now that we're not going to feature today of like Barack Obama giving an entire speech that doesn't have any like incendiary or highly political information in it, but it's just an example that's floating around out there of like how sophisticated they can get, kind of the look of the person and the mannerisms and the vocal tone that you might sort of perceive after watching it for 5 minutes that it's not real. But in the very beginning, your immediate mental assumption would be like, this is Barack Obama speaking these words, right? So that's why deepfakes, I think right now, and the experts are saying this, are the big thing that people are kind of worried about in this cycle. So the next thing that a lot of the experts are saying is that audio is kind of the most concerning one right now, because, or might be, because audio tends to have less giveaways. If you see a video of a deep fake, there's usually something about it that looks a little off, but audio can sound pretty true to the voice and the vocal intonations. And I think there's less suspicion of audio. And there's a very famous example that came up recently that we're going to talk about a little bit more today, which is that in the New Hampshire January 2024 primary cycle, there was a audio robocall that came out in the voice of Joe Biden, saying that people that wanted to vote in the November election should not vote in the primary, because somehow their vote would be exempted or canceled, or they would not be allowed to vote if they voted in the primary, which of course was not true. But people receiving a vocal call, of an audio call with the vocal intonation of Joe Biden, made it seem as if it was coming from the campaign, and that would be viable information if you're targeting voters that trust the Democratic Party or the campaign of Joe Biden, right? So the audio is the place where people are getting a little nervous, and audio has been used because it's not very sexy or fun. It's not really being used for entertainment purposes. So people aren't really like encountering it that much. And then when they do encounter it, it seems legitimate. They don't have as much of a reason to doubt it. Whereas, as we'll show later in the presentation, there are lots of examples of people using deep fakes for videos on TikTok. And so people have a little bit more of an expectation of that information being possibly fake, right? So there are a lot of key considerations and concerns that we're going to get into, but what I would love to do now is open it up to anybody in the room or anybody on the Zoom room who themselves has examples of where the types of ways that AI has showed up in the democracy space, or where you have key considerations or concerns that you'd like to raise at this point. So I think let's just, do you guys want to do hand raising on the Zoom? Or if you've got something on the Zoom and you'd like to raise your hand, go for it. Otherwise, maybe some of you in the room have thoughts too.
Yeah, Dean Farr has his hand raised.
Okay, Dean.
Yeah, I'm Dean Farr. I've been involved in trying to advocate with elected officials for a number of years, going back 20 years. And something that's gone on for a number of years that's kind of related to this, I've been called these action alerts. They send out an email to all their members in an organization and ask them to just check the box, put their name and address in, and they'll automatically generate emails and send them to their elected officials automatically. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, yes. And Go, carry on, sorry.
And a lot of election officials recognize that as, quote, machine email. They recognize it as chain emails, and they don't really pay much attention to it. Okay. When it comes to emails and communicating directly with legislators, and that's where I'm going to focus, it's the personalized communications is much more effective. So I think AI has got I'm kind of curious about AI and when you're trying to, influence legislators on that. Did they recognize it as machine email? And I've talked to a lot of legislators and their assistants, and they recognize and they don't even look at this stuff. More recently, there was an article regarding an issue in Alaska that the U.S. the Forest Service had to do regarding, changing the policy of managing the national forest up there. And the article went on. This is in Forbes, by the way, said they had 120,000 comments. What they went on to say is the comments they received that was on a letterhead that had a signature on it meant more to them than all these things. And so what's happening, they have these organizations that take a computer and they generate all these responses to the Forest Service on this issue, and they recognize that.
Yeah,
Let me kind of tie it back down, and I'll let somebody else comment. I've been
sure.
told by lobbyists, when it comes to legislatures, if you send them a letter on letterhead, some original comments, original signature, and put a stamp on it, it means 50 votes to them. So again, we're getting back to this personalized communications that is important to understand. That I think the nonprofits and the advocacy need to understand that those electronic communications part of the deal. I understand that, but it doesn't affect them. One last comment too on this. All these action alerts are done by a number of nonprofits, and they have businesses out there that provide the service, and you send these, for your members to send these action alerts. Well, one of the reasons those nonprofits do this is they want to get a count of the number of their members that send that action alert in. So then they can go to a granting organization, foundation says, we sent this out, we had 50 of our members use this, and it's a business model, if you will. So I'm telling you some stories here. I think it kind of ties into some of the history, and I'm not sure I'm kind of curious how AI might be used to influence the policymakers out there.
Yeah, I like that you raised that because those are actually some really important other sides to that first dot point of like easing interaction with the public sector. Like maybe now it's possible for thousands of letters to be generated or public comments, but will they just be diluting, their impact if everybody knows that somebody just clicked two buttons? And how do we grapple with that like volume that could be generated? That's a really important point. Thank you for that. Others? Any other hands? Okay. Okay, cool. Well, I think we'll keep going then. We're going to provide some examples now. This will be kind of fun. These little blurbs that we put up here relating to technology and business, basically just kind of signaling to all of you. I think you're going to have to use Liz's computer. Just kind of highlighting the way that we're in this space right now where there are some legal challenges, and we're going to talk about what's going on with some legal developments in Wisconsin, but also we know there are limitations at the federal level, there's not really any progress with distinct AI rules to protect elections yet. And also, we know that, even the space where there's some law developed, there are challenges to that. So needless to say, the context that we're in means that there's still a lot of action going on out there, even with these concerns about it, where people are making decisions to go ahead and still put content out there because we don't have a very distinctly regulated context for this. And it's kind of a little bit of a Wild West context. So we just put those blurbs in there to remind everybody, like, this is the context that we're in legally and actually, and the technology is changing and developing really fast. And so you've got some creative people out there that are putting some stuff out there for entertaining, and more complicated reasons. So we're going to show now a few examples. Here's the slide that, delivers on our promise to slightly touch on Taylor Swift. So not sure if there's any Swifties in the house, but I'm not necessarily one at all. Mad respect for Taylor Swift and her career. Wasn't necessarily trying to privilege this when we were going to talk about AI and democracy, but just a little over a week ago, most of us know, if you're paying attention to this kind of stuff, that Taylor Swift, the night of the presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, issued the statement on the left, along with an image of herself that she had taken and authorized and was actually of herself. So we didn't post that picture, but we posted the text of her, what has been called an endorsement of Kamala Harris. What she actually said was, I got concerned about the fact that an image of me was posted. This is Taylor Swift speaking, I'm paraphrasing. You can read it on the left if you want to see her actual words, but in my paraphrasing, I would say that she said, I got concerned by the fact that on certain websites, an image of me was circulating that had been AI generated that suggested that I was voting for Donald Trump and I wanted others to vote for Donald Trump. And while I am very, very, I take elections and democracy very seriously, and I research my candidates and vote in every election and encourage others to do so, I didn't necessarily feel compelled to say something about this, but now that there is this image of me floating around that is not true, I do feel the need to combat that misinformation with my truth. And then she went on to say that she planned to vote for Kamala Harris and expressed her reasoning on that, including referencing her running mate, Tim Walz, and you can see the language there. But this was a very interesting moment, and I think for many of us, because it showed the way that somebody like Taylor Swift, who has an enormous platform and is not herself a politician, but is a very influential person to many people, actually came forward with her endorsement, at least in her own words, because of the fact that something disingenuous had been put out there that was AI generated. And the image on the right is the image that was put on various channels with her face. Now, this one looks kind of doctored and stylized, so it's not as concerning as some of the other deep fakes that might be generated out there. But you can still see how it's a pretty captivating image, and somebody that liked Taylor Swift could still just get a quick glimpse of that and be like, wow, I now associate Taylor Swift with Donald Trump's campaign. And this was, according to Taylor Swift, not at all something that she ever wanted to have happen and was not her position. The AI generated bubbles that you see there are part of what is now associated with that image after the image was circulated and called out. So I don't think that the original one had those bubbles. And also in our sense of responsibility of putting images out there, we wanted to make sure we indicated that the AI generated stuff was front and center. So that's an example that wasn't the most technologically impressive example, but it still had a really big splash in the world, right? So we have some other examples for you now that will show, I think, a little bit more the capacity of AI.
It seems we have some views right there. Yeah.
Oh, Dean. Is your hand up? Or was that from before?
I don't know when it went.
You took it down.
Okay. So we're going to show a couple of other examples. My colleague Laura is here with me and helped put these together. So I think Laura's going to talk through the ones that we chose.
Yeah, hi everyone. These actually get to some of the points that Mary Beth has been talking about, particularly the first one here is about something that Elon Musk posted. And I think part of the concern is that these high profile individuals are reposting these. So Trump actually posted that Taylor Swift vote for Trump picture. And then Elon also posted or reposted this an AI video of Kamala saying some very some things she would never say. And let's see if we can get that up here.
Do you want to maximize the screen?
I'm trying.
Oh, sorry.
I don't know how to do back. Okay, here we go.
I just said.
Yeah.
And I don't know if sound isn't working. You might be.
Am I muted?
You might have to reshare your screen and check the share sound box.
Okay.
Might be causing us a little bit of difficulty. We're gonna give it a minute more and see if we can pull this off, but if not, we will. I think we can share what the videos were about without necessarily playing them. It's more fun to play them, but.
Yes, this is exposing my.
No, all good.
Okay.
Let's go back to the slide and describe what's in there. If we're having trouble with audio.
We do have a question.
Yeah, let's address
and,
the question while we get that back up.
So somebody shared, this is a great presentation. This is not a political position one way or another. I'm just curious as to whether there are examples from both parties using AI to attempt to influence.
Yeah, well, and I don't think we've put anything out here today that's from one party or the other. These are actually the New Hampshire example, there's a media company implicated and there's a political company implicated, but I don't think we actually have examples of, well, I guess Donald Trump posted the Taylor Swift
He
one.
reposted it. So
Okay.
just to be clear, none of these have been created by
No.
anybody on either side.
Right,
And so
yes.
that's part of possibly some of the confusion as well. We don't know the intention behind the reposting at all. We
Right.
just know that some of these very large public figures, even those who are part of the election, are posting some of the stuff. So
Yeah, and I think that actually, let's go back one more slide. And I think I would like to open it up after sharing these examples of where else other people have seen AI, and there could be examples aiming at increasing the chances of either candidate. The examples that we chose were the ones that have been cited the most. So the Biden robocall is one that's been cited the most by like experts because it actually is creating a legal case. And so it's kind of the test case right now. And then the Taylor Swift one just came up. And so that's the example that, I think just we're not using it to take a position whatsoever. It just happened to be a very high profile example. But I would love to open it up in a moment to see if people have examples that are maybe provide a contrast to those or provide more color to the full landscape of where this is coming up. And even Laura's examples that I think maybe we'll just have you like verbally explain here indicate that sometimes AI is actually used for like fairly positive or fun things that don't have to be so like scary or nefarious too. So Laura, do you want to share those examples?
yeah, sure. So the first example was just someone who's an AI ethicist and works, I believe, for GitHub, who is breaking down the implications of just AI audio and how that can be confusing for people, and particularly to Mary Beth's point about how it's harder to kind of know when that's AI. In particular. But then the second video we see here is actually just something that somebody made and put on there immediately that it was AI generated. So the original poster acknowledged that it was AI generated if people couldn't tell, but it actually is a very sophisticated looking visual AI. It's just Trump and Kamala on a day at the amusement park together. And if you can find it, it's an interesting watch and it's very realistic. So it shows the power behind what some of this work can do. But part of what the AI ethicist in the first video talks about is just how accessible it is for people to create AI now, and how it used to be something very difficult to do that people would have to put in a lot of effort to create. And now you see a lot of these like parody, fun kind of things. Most of these are not things that people would ever respond to either publicly the way that Taylor Swift did. And then the very last one there is just actually just demonstrating the global nature of the election and the AI content, particularly in the US. But there are several videos out there with the one was with Trump and Biden and one was with Trump and Kamala, basically singing Chinese songs about friendship. So, people have taken some interesting and creative approaches to this. One more comment about the Taylor Swift one is actually that same image was first posted in a For Biden Facebook group. So the original AI was image was posted in a small group on Facebook and it said vote for Biden. And then somebody changed it to say vote for Trump. And then it was shared by Trump. And that is when she decided to address it because it just got such a large platform. So really that's not AI is going on in this process with a lot of people who are on a lot of different stances. It's just becoming so easily shared and so accessible and so confusing for folks that I think sometimes people have to come out and like Taylor did and just clear the air a little bit. So I'm sorry we couldn't show you these videos. The second one is particularly fun, but
yeah. And that one, to be clear, that middle one and the one on the right, to the best of my knowledge, nobody's even suggesting that those are like trying to make somebody look good or bad. They're just more about like, these are people we're paying attention to right now. Let's have some AI fun with them, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's open it up. I mean, you all might know other examples. So has anybody else seen an example that they want to just like flag for us, whether that be something fun or something that was concerning to you, or to the point of the question, maybe one that's sort of going in the other direction, if you will, on the current presidential contest?
Liz Murphy has her hand raised.
Yeah, Liz, what's an example that you've seen, or what would you like to share?
Sure. So something I can share, just because I'm aware of it, happening on both sides of the aisle, is people are using AI essentially to accelerate the speed at which they can respond to big issues with advertisements. Previously, if you wanted to record like a TV ad or whatever, you had to get a voice actor in a booth, and then you had to film something. And what I know that some campaigns are doing is they're using AI generated voices to read text, and they can slap it over stock images or AI generated images. And so it's kind of accelerating the advertising landscape in a really interesting way. And I know that's happening both on all sides of the aisle with political advertising.
That is such a good point, Liz. Thank you for raising that. That did come up in some of the background reading and information gathering that I did from some of the experts out there, of just like even the sophistication of the advertisements too, like some of the AI generated images that they can include and things. So thank you for that. Yes. Others? Dean, do you have another example?
Yeah, just on advertising. Going back a number of years ago, I took a marketing course at the University of Wisconsin, and they talked about advertising, how effective is advertising. And generally the rule of three, you had to contact via advertising, either visual or print or audio, at least 3 times to be effective. Beyond that, it was cost prohibitive. And so there's always been this discussion going on for years about the effectiveness of advertising. So I don't have an answer. I'm just kind of curious how this IA generated advertising, how effective is it? Is it actually getting consumers to buy things or whatever? Or is it just so cheap they just can kind of flood the airwaves with it? So I don't know. I just shared that thought.
Yes, that's a good point too. I think there are questions of this stuff can like rattle us and seem really scary, but also it's a little unclear how it's really impacting people. Anybody else have examples?
Liz Murphy again.
Liz.
Sorry, this isn't an example, it's a question. So if we want to leave some space for other people's examples, I can hush for a second.
No, I think let's go for it. And others can raise their hands if they also have things they want to share.
Okay. I was curious if you've seen any research or background about whether the use of AI is playing a role in accelerating the sort of public distrust of systems and establishments. Have you seen any work linking those two issues?
So what I would say to that is that it's an area that people are exploring both more broadly. Like statistically, we know that there is evidence that Americans, let's just speak of the American context right now, Americans' trust in institutions and government has declined in recent history, and that's a major aspect of the broader civic health questions that I mentioned that we're talking about in our Civic Health of Wisconsin initiative and reporting. But that also relates to things just like the media and viewing the media and social media as places that there's no such thing as a neutral viewpoint and everything is biased. Whether or not like the existence of AI as a pixelated like subset of that distrust in government question, whether that research has really like come forth. I don't personally have a knowledge of that, although at the end of the presentation, we'll give you some examples of some academic centers that are doing like pretty deep research on this stuff and offering interventions that they would recommend. So anecdotally, I think, yes, there is a link between those things because there's even some examples. I'll just give one example right now that's come up that we'll talk about later, but there was a concerning example in the case of a local election where there was a call made to people working in a given jurisdiction that came from the voice of the clerk saying something like, and I'm not going to get this completely right, but something like the polls are going to open later or the polls are going to stay open later. So then all the people that like know that person and know her voice were like, oh, well, maybe I need to show up later tomorrow or whatever. And so that's an example that if that was effective, it could create chaos in a sense of unreliability if people show up when they think they're supposed to, and then the poll is not open, or people even hear about that, and then when they get real information from a real source, they're like not sure if it's real or not. And one of the themes that I've heard a lot from the experts that study this much more than me is that they're less worried about a fake piece of information being interpreted as true. And they're more worried about the flooding of the landscape with this fake information such that people's sense of, oh, there's actually like reliable sources that I could trust, staying like stable, and they're worried about an instability in the sensibilities of people about whether like official information that they receive is real or not. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I don't think I have a very satisfying answer for you, but those are some thoughts.
Thanks.
Has anybody else seen a wild and crazy TikTok video or anything that would kind of highlight these types of examples? Or other concerns or questions on this before we move on? Okay, let's keep going. So I guess we kind of already did this brainstorm break, fun and concerning examples, or what have you seen when it comes to AI's role in democracy? But I'll just use this opportunity to say we did intend for this session to be much more interactive than some that we'll do. So at any point, if you have a question or want to throw something in the chat, we're monitoring that and you can bring it up. So let's keep going. So here's a little bit of a summary, and I've started to lean into this a little bit of like what the major concerns really are right now. So there's the question of like impact on perceptions. If you see a video of, and I'll flip the examples for the sake of an anecdote here or a hypothetical here. If you see a video of Donald Trump saying, I intend to implement every single component of Project 2025, a point that he has equivocated about in his actual coming from him speeches and positions, he says he's not going to implement every single part of 2020 Project 2025, which is a think tank's published set of suggestions for a presidency of Donald Trump. But Donald Trump has, in his own words and his own presentations on this, said he does not intend to implement that. So let's pretend for a moment that there was an AI generated video of Donald Trump saying, or a fake video of him having a good laugh with Elon Musk or another famous person, that he plans to implement all of those things, and that started circulating. That could really be impactful to people that are not sure what they think about Donald Trump, but don't like Project 2025, right? So there's a question of, if there's fake content around out there, will that affect people's perceptions of actual candidates? And that's very aligned, in my opinion, to the issues that we saw in 2016, less so in 2020, but especially 2016, where it's just more about like misinformation being circulated and people needing to decipher that, or it could affect their perception of candidates or party platforms or the contest at hand, right? So although AI is doing new things with that, in some ways that's a concern that's been around for the last 2 presidential elections. The second concern is impact on processes. So one thing that almost all of the experts will say over and over again is that the actual voting systems that we have, or I'll at least speak for Wisconsin, the Wisconsin voting processes are not connected to the internet. There is not concern among the experts or the Wisconsin Election Commission that the actual voting processes of like counting votes or submitting ballots to a counting machine, that those things would be impacted in any way. There's not concern about that among the experts. However, there is concern with these kinds of examples, and not in an acute way in Wisconsin, but just in the way that we've seen a couple of examples where if a robocall goes out and tells you, did you know that the voting laws have changed? Did you know that the Dropbox policy has changed? That could actually be pretty concerning in terms of people's understanding of the process. Or did you know that mail-in voting is no longer counted in Wisconsin? That could really mess with some people's understanding of the processes. And yes, misinformation about that could have been circulated long before AI, but AI makes it seem more concerning, or rather convincing and compelling. You know, if you really think that the voice telling you that is your local election official or is a candidate, right? And we've highlighted a couple of those examples. So there are some concerns about that. And we'll talk in a minute about like what we can do about that and what is going on with civic health groups to help combat the risk of that. There is this broader concern of the trust in the truth. Okay, so an example of where this has come up, that there was a truth involved, and I'm sorry that this example goes again in that one direction that was called out earlier, and I appreciate the call out, but this is the example that I have, whereby there was a Kamala Harris rally, and there were a lot of people at the rally, and there were images of that. But then it was claimed that those were AI generated images. So the irony of this is that this was not about an AI generating situation. It was actually about a real situation, but because now AI is in our ecosystem, there was a claim that that was false, that was not real. So I hope you're following that logic, but there's a question of, is all of this AI in the landscape going to trust people's going to change people's trust, in the actual things that are truthful. There's also, there are reliable media sources and actual campaign communications and actual celebrities speaking to their preferences, and there's a concern that those will now be viewed as like also generated by AI or not true. So I think that's one of the really big kind of like ways that like the cellular structure of the way that we participate in our information landscapes could be being changed in a deeper way by the existence of these technologies. Next slide. So the good news is, even though this is a murky space, and as we mentioned before, there's not a national legislation around this. There are not national guardrails around this. And there's still a long ways to go to understand like what the capabilities of these things are and how we would even regulate them, or how we would disincentivize misuse of these things. There are civil society efforts in this space. There's an organization called Partnership on AI, which I put first on the list because this is actually a multi-sector organization that includes players from the technology companies that might have even generated the AI, or even the places, the like social media like companies that are hosting AI multimedia information, but it also includes purpose-based organizations that, and I think Partnership on AI itself is a purpose-based organization that are working for a future where artificial intelligence empowers humanity by contributing to a more just, equitable, and prosperous world, which would mean they would be exploring things about guardrails on how AI could be used in nefarious ways that would go against those things. So that's an organization whose website you can look at if you want to learn more, but I wanted to highlight it because it includes companies and purpose-driven actors that are trying to like get this right. There's also some really awesome academic research centers that we're already looking at questions of democracy, but that are specifically digging in on the way AI is affecting democracy. The Ash Center at Harvard and the Brennan Center at NYU, very good examples of that. There are probably others. And then there are organizations like Public Citizen, it's not the only one, that had historically had a role looking at consumer advocacy and making sure that democratic, pro-democratic rights and participation remains available, and has looked at a lot of different issues over the generations of its existence or iterations of its existence, but is looking specifically at AI and advocating for guardrails and policy around this stuff. Because we are consumers that are consuming information, which now includes AI, so it fits kind of squarely in what they're up to. Some of the things that are happening in those civil society efforts nationally and globally that I want to highlight are that there's a recognition in those spaces that tech companies themselves have an outside influence in this space. So we're not living in a world where AI is like even as regulated as like electricity, you know, which still has a lot of private company influence depending on the state. But we're living in a space where the information companies and tech companies are still taking up a lot of space when it comes to like who gets to say so and how this stuff shows up. And the advent of social media has highlighted the way that even like media regulation that was geared towards newspapers and television stations in the public square looks a lot different when there are channels that are totally owned by publicly traded or privately held companies, right? That have a profit incentive and have control over the way that they allow certain information in and out. There are some opt-in guardrails that are being promulgated by groups like Partnership on AI, where social media companies would say, here are our standards about AI. We are going to try to designate when something is AI generated, give it a little tag. But again, those are opt-in. And I think one of the challenges that I didn't call out on this slide, but I do want to mention is that even monitoring that stuff, like if you think about the way that tech companies have gone through their phases of trying to monitor like nudity or content that's not good for kids or misinformation, we know that the way that they go about that and whether they have the apparatus to do it like before stuff hits the social media landscape, there's a lot of variability in whether they're even able to do that or willing to dedicate the resources to that. And they themselves have to be the ones to discern whether something is appropriate or not. So there's a lot of questions of like how tech companies are really going to like manage this. And when they sign up for opt-in guardrails, are they doing that just so that they can say publicly, hey, we have some policies about this, Congress, don't regulate us, we're doing it ourselves. And whether that has any teeth, right? So there is a push to recommend to Congress some legislation that would help with this stuff, but nothing to date has gone to the floor, is my understanding, even though there are legislators that are interested in it and concerned with it. But certainly before the November election, there's not going to be any new legislation around this stuff. We're going to talk in a minute about how the FCC has been able to use its existing framework to look at AI in some ways, but nothing specific to AI has been passed in the federal government anyway. There is some good stuff happening with training and education for local officials. So the Brennan Center at NYU is a great example of this. They've run scenarios with a lot of local clerks and local officials that for that scenario that I described earlier, where an election official gets, election like involved officials or volunteers get a call from somebody that sounds like their boss saying they don't have to show up. You know, once we become aware of these things, or how do we avoid these things? How do we train our staff and our volunteers to know that those kinds of things could be coming? When it happens, how do we do damage control and crisis communications? So there's some good work happening around that. There's also some like less acute things that they're saying could happen with AI that we want to be on the lookout for. And the example that I've heard them use is like a new Twitter account that looks a lot like the official account of the Dane County Clerk of Courts or the La Crosse County Clerk of Courts, simply posts a Twitter post that says, parking at the polling location will cost $25 on election day. So it's not using someone's voice, and it's not saying the polling location is closed, but it could deter people, right? And so there's things like that that they're asking local officials to really be on the lookout for and track. Next slide. So there is some regulation happening in the space. I'll give you a couple of examples here. So with the Biden audio case in New Hampshire, there actually is, there have been civil suits filed because there's existing FCC, Federal Communications Commission regulation that applies to a scenario of using someone's voice and giving misinformation around elections. And so there are fines being levied against the media company that was involved in that. And there's still a case being negotiated or tried or adjudicated in some way with the political consultant involved, and they will suffer consequences. Like I think the media company got charged $1 million, and I think the political consultant could suffer even heftier fines. But the problem with that is that's happening 6 months to 8 months after the thing happens. And there might be, that may or may not provide a sufficient deterrence for something as consequential as an election. So limitations to that, but there is regulatory action being taken on that. In Wisconsin, Governor Evers did sign into law, I think this summer, I don't have the date handy, legislation that was put forward that will require that any audio or video communication disclose if the communication is paid for by a candidate or a candidate committee or legislative campaign committee, any of these official bodies that are doing political work, whether it contains synthetic media, meaning this artificial intelligence generated stuff, and if it has express advocacy. So basically you're getting at that like highest level of concerning information where you would be a political entity using AI to promote a certain position, right? And it just has to disclose it. So I mean, that's good, right? It like helps, but you can gauge for yourself whether that's going to have a major impact. But we do have a law on the books in Wisconsin on that now. Next slide. So I'd love to open it up to what we can do. We have organizations that are working on lots of adjacent issues to, well, civic health or directly civic health oriented issues and democracy issues. And a lot of those same organizations that are doing work around education on democratic processes and discerning media, whether that be in schools or out on in the community, organizations that are information sharing about elections and democracy, organizations that are advocating for good policy around democracy. Obviously, they can all probably weave in some stuff about AI. And to be very honest with you, even though I'm working a lot in the civic health space in Wisconsin, it's a little unclear to me what the agendas are right now of any of the civic health organizations, specifically around AI. I think it's a seedling space and it'll develop in the time to come. But I also think we should be contemplating our own roles in this. What can we do individually? Can we talk to our friends and family about this stuff? How do we use social media? And are we at all contributing to the spread of AI generated information? How do we connect with others about their experiences with this? So I'd love to open it up for a minute and see if people feel like they can be doing anything, or if they have any ideas or knowledge of what people are doing about these things in their circles. Maybe it's a brainstorm for us to think about after today. And in the interest of time, why don't we keep going? So I did want to just end on a couple of updates for all of you about what's happening more broadly with civic health in Wisconsin right before the election. We have the advantage in our work of having a little bit of a bird's eye view of this space and some direct involvement in a very nonpartisan way. I want to emphasize that again and again. But there are a lot of organizations in Wisconsin working on a safe and successful election season. A lot of those civil society organizations and public sector organizations are working on ensuring that there's trust in election processes, and that that clerks across the state feel like I think one thing in Wisconsin that's true is that there's a lot of regard for the clerks and the people that run the elections in local jurisdictions and precincts. And, they've got this, but is the perspective of most people. But there's, of course, civil society organizations that are trying to make sure that that is indeed true and that people will trust the results when the election officials issue their results. The Wisconsin Elections Commission is the statewide entity that oversees elections statewide, and the chair of that committee was a Republican nominated individual, Don Millis, and he's been very vocal that he trusts the processes of Wisconsin elections. And so I think in that space right now, people feel like we have really reputable election officials and people overseeing elections that are saying that we should have trust in our election processes, but there's still concern because of misinformation and things that have come up and bubbled up in the last several years, that there will be people that don't trust the results. And that's why it's even the work of some of these civil society organizations. Like, if that wasn't a concern, there wouldn't be work happening around it.
We have a hand raised.
Yeah, let's hear from who's raising their hand. Carla.
Hi, I'll turn my camera on. My dog's cuter, but
Oh, hi, Carla.
hi. Just a question. Are there any that you're aware of? And I know this is all kind of a new frontier, right? Are there any, I know there's AI detector software out there and tools that people can use. Are there any organizations or entities that you're aware of that are like, that's the place and the space they live in? They're trying to identify these things and, knock them out when they can. At least make them look, make it clear that they're not real. And then is there anything we can do as League of Women Voters, for example? Is there anything we can?
I'll take that question to our colleague at the League of Women Voters about whether they're doing anything with this. I don't know the answer to that question. I think where it's happening for sure is in these national organizations that are very comfortable with the software, recommending that the software be used by the media companies like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and TikTok, to the extent I don't know if they actually engage with TikTok. It's unclear to me. But in terms of like monitoring on a statewide basis or a local basis, I think there's not like a policing entity that I'm aware of that's like just going around and looking at the landscape of AI. And I think part of the problem with that is that the platforms themselves are not geographically specific. So you could comb through Twitter for things that mention Wisconsin or mention elections in Wisconsin, but like the platform itself isn't really like Wisconsin specific. So I think that's why a lot of this is happening in the bigger spaces. I'm sorry that I don't have a more satisfying answer for you.
That is okay. That is an answer. Again, this is kind of new stuff, so
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Great question. And that relates a little bit to one thing I will comment on, which is the next point, which is one thing that is being monitored quite well by a couple of civil society organizations that we're connected with, is the concern about, and this is really sad to even have to talk about it, but intimidation and targeted violence. So there's been a very notable uptick of threats going to election officials and elected officials. And so this is really good to know, and I'm really glad it exists. There are organizations, including the Bridging Divides Initiative, which is one of the ones that we work with closely, which is literally like tracking some of the spaces and social media platforms and communication networks where they can flag if there's like stuff that's being said on those platforms that would indicate that any proposed violence or intimidation is being planned. And they're monitoring and staying in touch with clerks and election officials and elected officials about any threats that are coming to them. And they're able to publish like situation reports. So that feels, although it's really sad that that's even on the table, it's really good to know that there are organizations monitoring that leading up to the election, so that an example people talk about a lot is like, if there were going to be a group of people that were going to stand around a drop box with where you would drop your ballot or go gather at a polling place, that they would hopefully know about that in advance and then be able to help mitigate that or get people involved to help make it so that it didn't intimidate people from participating. And then there are tons of organizations that are working on Get Out the Vote and just making sure that people understand how to navigate those processes that might be more challenging depending on who you are. Like you may be moved or you need a voter ID or your polling place changed. And so lots of work happening in that civic health space with organizations doing that kind of targeted work on election stuff. On the right-hand side, I just wanted to point out that although it's going to be kind of a colorful web is the term that I use, there is a lot of good connecting happening across various organizations. There's been a lot of, as you might imagine, kind of focus on Wisconsin as one of the 7 states that will probably determine this election from outside sources, and then efforts that have been focused in Wisconsin. But the good news is that a lot of those that we've seen, I mean, this is speaking not of partisan or political organizations, but rather those organizations that are working on pro-democracy, safe and successful elections, trust in institutions, civic health stuff. A lot of those organizations are working together to network and make sure they understand what each other are doing. There's been a huge uptick in events where there's information sharing about like how Wisconsin elections are run, why we can trust them, why it matters, And so I think I just wanted to kind of offer that as we leave today, that AI and this communication stuff and this democracy, these democracy questions around AI can be concerning, and it is a very important subset of us to be paying attention to. But there's also this whole other like multifaceted ecosystem in which folks are trying to promote civic health and promote pro-democratic trends in Wisconsin. And the good news story is a lot of them are doing great work and they're collaborating and coordinating together. And another thing I really want to emphasize that I think kind of came up in today's discussion is that there is an explosion of work happening to make sure that people of different political viewpoints are talking together and that we're depolarizing and connecting across difference. with the end game of a healthy civil society and a healthy democracy in mind. And so I'm personally very inspired by that. And I don't know about you all, but I'd love to get back to a place where we have discussions about policy positions that might differ and the way that we look at issues that might differ, but it's not so sort of all of us in our rabbit holes and not really in echo chambers and not really trusting each other and not really knowing how to talk to each other. And I see a huge explosion of work happening in that way. So another thing I'll mention that I didn't put on the slide is that there's a lot of work going on around like constructive dialogue and de-escalation, so that if you are in a situation out in the community and people have different information or different views on something, that they can engage productively and not have it turn into something more adversary. So I think one more slide and we'll wrap it up here. And this is just a goodbye and thank you slide, I'm pretty sure. Oh, it doesn't show up here. So yeah, thank you for coming. We do offer a little post-session survey if you're willing to provide us feedback. There's some information there about the different social media platforms that we use from our center if you want to follow us. We will not provide any AI generated content on there without a disclosure or a disclaimer. I don't think we've ever done that, but if we ever did, we would definitely not make it political and we would definitely disclaim it. And we do have this as a monthly thing that's going to happen. And next month, we're hoping to focus on sports, activism, and philanthropy, which should be really interesting. So we can hang around if anybody wants to ask any final questions, but that's going to kind of bring us to the end of our content for today. So let's open it up if anybody has questions. Otherwise, if you feel like you want to sign off, please do stay in touch with us.
In response to your question about what we can do more, even individually, Kylie had shared, when I send information about elections, I always send info direct from the source. Wisconsin Elections Commission, League of Women Voters, information about referenda, my local clerk's office. I don't post or repost social media information about elections.
Fabulous. That is a great recommendation. Yeah. Yeah, so having a personal ethic about what you're going to share and why, where it's coming from. Yeah. Yeah, I know for me, ever since I've gotten in this work, especially, I do also, in my personal life, I don't share anything anymore that's partisan. I don't really share anymore. I mostly just use my social media for work, but like, even in conversations, I try to refer to information that I've gathered from like reputable sources that is not coming from like a partisan source or an overly biased media source, just because like I think it also makes people shut down. You know, they're like, why would I listen to anything else that you're going to say when I know already that you are sharing information that came from, you know, not that I really did a lot of that, but I just think I'm more thoughtful about it because of how personally invested I've become in like civic health more broadly. Any other questions? Okay, well, that took longer than I expected. We've come right up upon the 1:30 mark. Please stay connected with us and join us next month, and good luck with your personal or organizational work around the election and democracy and this wild and crazy information landscape that we live in.